I'm joined by Lewis Goodall of the Newsagents to talk through some of the political stories of the day. We'll get on to the pre-budget talk in a minute, Lewis. But Clive Lewis, the Labour MP, has sort of poked the bear a bit, hasn't he?
He has, Sheila. I mean, he is, look, a maverick. Of course, Clive Lewis, isn't he? And he is on the left of the party. He's not a natural ally of the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. But nonetheless, the fact that you can have a backbench Labour MP going onto television and actively saying that he would be willing to surrender his parliamentary seat in Norwich for one of the Prime Minister's principal rivals, i.e. Andy Birmingham, I think adverts to what I think a lot of Labour MPs would consider a just declining authority at the very centre of government. We saw that last week, didn't we, as well, with Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary. Again, provoked, it must be said, but again, willing to go on television and say that the Prime Minister's own number 10 Downing Street operation was and is toxic. Not attacking the Prime Minister personally, but nonetheless attacking his operation and closest aides, which we all know is tantamount to attacking the Prime Minister himself, and for his trouble, not getting chastised, not getting disciplined, not getting told off, but apologised to by the Prime Minister himself. So again, I don't think much is going to come of this little ruse that Clive Lewis has got, not least that I think it would be absolutely toxic for Andy Burnham's own kind of political credibility. This man who has decided to be and been described as the King of the North, ending up being the King of Norwich, doesn't have quite the same ring to it. But nonetheless, as I say, I think it adverts to the Prime Minister's own rapidly declining authority over his party, I'd say.
I was reading a piece yesterday by Lord Finkelstein, Danny Finkelstein, in the Times, where he was saying that in his view, there's something of the Joe Biden moment here. They're not direct parallels, but that since the briefing operation against Wes Streeting, and that was designed to shore up the Prime Minister's position, it's done quite the opposite. It's shown the vulnerabilities.
I think that's right. And it's an interesting piece, as you say, from Danny Finkelstein. I think that what we saw last week with 10 Downing Street attempting to do something clever by getting ahead of what they readily consider to be a rising possibility, which is a challenge to Keir Starmer at some point, possibly around the May elections, whatever it happens to be, of trying to kind of smoke Wes Streeting and his rivals out. What it basically did was legitimise, to some extent, the idea of a contest, or at least, as you say, Sheila, sort of make it clear to all other MPs that, well, remember that Michael Howard 2005 leadership or election pledge or election motto was, "Are you thinking what we're thinking?" What that did in attacking Wes Streeting in that way and making it clear that number 10 is potentially thinking of a challenge, is sort of say to all other Labour MPs, oh,
it's on.
We're thinking about a challenge as well.
This could be on.
And I think this is the psychological step change which has taken place, Sheila, over the last sort of couple of weeks. If you and I had been having this conversation a month ago, we probably were having this conversation a month ago in one form or another. I think that...
And dismissing it as mere speculation, but there's more now, isn't there? Yeah.
And I think we wouldn't have been sat here saying it feels less likely than likely that the Prime Minister would lead Labour into the next election. He's on the front page of the Daily Mirror saying, I will lead Labour into the next election. My impression from Labour MPs is that for your average Labour MP now feels like a remote possibility at this moment. That isn't to say that it could change. Of course it could. But right now, the conversation within the PLP is about what the post-Starmer world looks like.
Yeah.
And that wasn't necessarily the case even a few months ago.
You mentioned the May elections as being a possible flashpoint for all of that. Before that, next Thursday, we have the budget, and we've been looking at it as well as doing other stories today. We're looking ahead to the budget. And in Prime Minister's questions today, so was Kemi Badenoch, wasn't she?
I didn't catch the first bit of what you said there, Sheila. Just repeat that. You just disappeared from it.
Just that we are looking ahead to the budget next week. Yes. Long before the May elections, which could be a tipping point for Keir Starmer, there is next Thursday to get over, isn't there, for both him and Rachel Reeves? Yeah,
there's a budget next week today. Look, it's obviously a really, really big moment. And again, I think that the pre-budget period has been, again, pretty damaging for Starmer and for Rachel Reeves. Why do I say that? Well, again, we would have been having a conversation a couple of weeks ago about that pretty extraordinary sort of early morning, almost felt like an emergency kind of briefing from the Chancellor, where she
School assembly,
yeah, perhaps, from the headmistress, basically saying, leading her troops up to the top of the hill, right? The Duke of York is obviously an unpopular figure in lots of ways at the moment, the former Duke of York, so it's an unfortunate metaphor, but nonetheless, going up, marching up to the top of the hill, basically on the basis that we are going to increase income tax. Maybe we'll decrease national insurance to kind of compensate, but that's the direction we're going in. And so Labour MPs are starting to think about that and starting to prepare their arguments, marshalling their arguments to themselves and potentially their constituents. Lo and behold, what happens last week? We learned that actually the Chancellor isn't going to do that after all. So as one Labour MP said, we talk about pitch rolling in politics, preparing a way, as they gave to, and you can imagine why this was unattributed, they said we've been rolling the wrong effing pitch. And that is the problem, that you basically got Labour MPs that has two effects. One is it suggests a kind of strategic chaos at the heart of government, and they are on top of that confused about what message it is, if any, that they're going to be selling or trying to sell to their constituents after the budget next week. So, and the third effect as well, by the way, is that they were going into that, both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer, saying our trump card here is that we are the ones that the markets trust, and therefore we can keep UK borrowing costs down. It's not much of a card to play to a parliamentary Labour Party who doesn't really want to hear it.
Or to an electorate.
No, they don't really like the idea of having a sort of technocratic government, the kind of Mario Monti, if people remember him, the Italian technocratic Prime Minister of the UK. But that itself has been undermined because she herself, in retreating from those, what she was going to do, has basically destabilised the markets, at least to some extent, and removed that ace up her sleeve insofar as it was one.
You wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about when all the talk was of an increase in income tax, and your judgment, correct me if I'm wrong here, if I'm misrepresenting what you said, but your judgment seemed to be they could have done this much earlier without big political damage being done. Now it's too late. If she does this, it will cause big political damage. Now, it looks as though the decision has been made not to, as you said. But what emerged from PMQs today was essentially that tax thresholds are likely to be freezed, which for many people, well, for everybody, will be an increase in their income tax one way or another.
Well, actually, I haven't resolved from that view. I think that if Reeves had gone ahead with an increase of income tax and thereby broken the Labour manifesto pledge, whatever sort of neat trick you tried to pull off, cute trick you tried to pull off with NI, I think it would have been politically catastrophic. I think it would have been politically catastrophic for her. I think it would have been damaging, as we discussed at the time, for politics itself, because you shouldn't make those sorts of promises that people do internalise if you're not absolutely sure that you're going to make them. I think that was the view of your average Labour MP, and I think that is the reason that they've retreated from it, such as their political vulnerability. But you're absolutely right to say that in a way, whatever they do with income tax, it's all a bit of a sleight of hand, because governments, the Labour government did it in the last budget, but also Conservative governments repeatedly did this thing where, of course, they freeze income tax thresholds, which creates something that, as you know, economists talk about fiscal drag, i.e. your income goes up, but with inflation, or perhaps because you're earning slightly more money, but the tax thresholds don't go up with inflation with them, which basically means that you end up find yourself paying a higher rate of tax than you otherwise might have expected to do. In the late 1980s, Sheila, I think when the income tax, the top rate of income tax, was reduced by Nigel Lawson in that famous budget in 1987 to 40p in the pound, I think I'm right in saying that only about 3 or 4% of income tax earners actually were paying the higher rate tax. That is now 17, 18, 19%, right? So that is the effect of fiscal drag in action. People who would once never have paid that higher rate end up paying that higher rate. People who are on reasonably modest incomes in the grand scheme of things. And that is basically an increase in income tax by other means. And it is something that both Conservative chancellors and indeed this Labour Chancellor seem set to do.
And it's not easy to hide. Well, it's impossible to hide, isn't it? Because it's in people's pay packets.
It is. But the reason that chancellors find it appealing, I think, Sheila, is because even though it has the same effect, really, more or less, as an income tax increase, it doesn't have the same sort of political effect, right? Because if the Chancellor comes along and says, I'm going to increase income tax, everyone understands what that means, particularly if you've made a manifesto pledge about it. But if very quietly they just don't increase the income tax thresholds, in line with inflation. It doesn't sound as dramatic. People don't quite understand it in quite the same way. It takes an extra beat or two, an extra few syllables to explain. And suddenly sort of people have sort of dozed off. And so as a result, even though they may well see it in their pay packets in the fullness of time, it doesn't have the sort of political saleability and the political toxin that income tax increases would have. And that's one of the reasons that, income tax, the basic income tax rate has not actually increased since the 1970s. But the income tax thresholds have continued to be, in real terms, more damaging and frozen in one form or another for many years and on and off in many budgets.
Thank you very much indeed, Lewis. Lewis Goodall, presenter of Sundays with Lewis Goodall, of course, and co-host of Global's podcast, The Newsagents, which drops at 5 o'clock this evening.